The last time around, I talked about my new experimental system using depots and points for supply purposes. And I demonstrated some of the tools that are available to players to check and see to which depots units are assigned, how many supply points are in a depot, how to distribute more supply points to depots, and so forth. This demonstration should be a little bit shorter, and its intent is to show how the system takes care of supply determination. Players can override if they want to, but we've got about a 99.9% accuracy rate of the system being able to determine who's in supply and who's out of supply using the depots and supply points system. It's important to note here that unlike the rules as written, when using the depot-based supply module, units have only two elements to their supply line, and the first element is the overland element through any kind of terrain, and the second element is for roads, and of course railroads count as roads here. So that makes, depending on the weather and depending on the terrain, that makes for a maximum supply leash of 14 hexes, although it can vary a lot depending on where enemy units are, what kind of terrain, whether you even have roads available, and that sort of thing. So we'll take a look here. I've set this up in kind of an unusual way. I have intentionally gone in and manipulated the supply system for some units. So units that you would normally think, oh gosh, that guy ought to be in supply, and maybe I've marked him as out of supply, and I've tweaked a few things just in an effort to show off some of the features here. So we'll see how that works. We'll see if I did a decent job of that, and we'll see if it works properly. So where we are now is we are ready to end the initial phase for the Axis player in September 1, 1944. The Allies have landed and broken out of the beachhead, started moving around. As we end this phase, the system is going to automatically go in and look at every supply depot and every unit for both the Allied player and the Axis player, and it's going to ascertain who's in supply and who's out of supply. If out of supply, it could be because the unit is too far away from the depot, could be because the depot no longer exists, it could be because the depot doesn't have enough supply points on hand to supply everybody who wants to get supplied from that depot. So anyway, we'll give this a click and see what happens. All right, so it's already starting to tell us some things. As usual, verbose mode is turned on. If you don't want to see these messages, you can turn off verbose mode. And in fact, I've added some extra messages here just to keep track of what's going on, and just for demonstration purposes. Normally they wouldn't show up at all, whether verbose mode is on or off. So here it's saying that this particular depot must randomly unsupply 3 REs from the array that's keeping track of this. So this is not something players would normally see. And here are the units that are drawing supply from that depot, but there's not enough supply to provide supply points to all of these units. So the system is going to randomly decide who gets supplied and who starts to starve. So we'll let the system decide that. It shows a flak battalion, so it's starting to add up here. So far we have half an RE. It shows a penal infantry battalion, and it shows the 244 Infantry Division. That should be enough. All right, so now let's put everything back in balance. It's looking around some more. It says, oh, look, the broken down regiment of the, maybe I should say the breakdown regiment of the 338th Infantry Division is out of supply. And I intentionally put that unit far, far away from where it should be. So it is beyond the supply leash for its depot. But it just so happens that that unit is carrying supplies. So the system says, look, this guy is going to be out of supply. Do you want to expend the supplies that he's carrying to keep him in supply? Well, maybe you do, and maybe you don't, because maybe you don't care about this unit. Maybe it's more important that he needs to ferry those supplies to a depot in a remote location where the supplies can't get there any other way. In this case, we'll say, yeah, it's okay. Go ahead and expend the supplies to keep him in supply. And it tells us, oh yeah, we did that. Again, this is just for demo purposes. This has not anything that would normally be seen at all. We'll close that. So now the system has finished going through looking at every depot and every unit, and it has placed red dots on units that it thinks there is at least one unit in that headquarters that's out of supply. Like I say, I'm confident we have about a 99.9% accuracy rate here, but players can change this if they want to. If you think a unit that is marked as out of supply should be put back into supply, you can just do that. And because the red dot is gone, the system now no longer believes that that unit is out of supply. But we can also say, put him back where he was. Or I could pick this guy up here and say, you know, these French units, they can't have supply all the way up there. So I want to force those units to be out of supply. Now, I'm not suggesting that you should do that. I'm not suggesting you should screw up your opponent's units by marking them out of supply when they're not really out of supply. But this is available if you need to use it. Another thing that's available here is if you want to check and see, well, what's the supply radius for a particular depot? And we can go up here and, for example, let's look at Lyon. I know there's a supply depot there, so when we pop this open, sure enough, there's Lyon. And it shows us, first of all, the hex marked in blue is where the depot itself is. Hexes marked in green are hexes within 7 road hexes of the supply depot. And then in yellow, and this kind of looks like different colors, it's really all this light yellow, and it just depends on whether it's in clear terrain or mountains or whatever. But the yellow are hexes within the overland element of the supply leash for the depot that's in Lyon. So we can see it extends all the way out to here. And in fact, I know this unit down here, oh, I'm sorry, it was this unit down here, the 10th, is assigned to Lyon, but I intentionally put it outside of the supply limit, but also I made sure that it was carrying supplies so that it could stay in. And if we want to see, for example, let's take a look at Avignon, and we click here, it erases all the previous ones, and now it shows us that, okay, the depot is over here in Avignon. Here's road within 7, and then beyond that we have the overland element. And note that here we have a French division, so it's actually exerting zone of control into these hexes, meaning that the French can't use that as part of their supply. Here we actually have a French unit that advanced up the road, but it's okay because there's no zone of control involved. For the overland supply leash, it doesn't matter who owns those hexes. So basically that's what the system is doing, and we can get rid of all of those if we want to. If we go back here, it takes them all away. And when we're satisfied with this, whether or not we decided we needed to make changes, and I should point out, by the way, that at this juncture, it's too late to change any of your supply and depot information. If you say, oh gosh, I meant to assign this unit over here to this depot, it's too late. That needed to happen earlier on before we reach this point. So now we'll go ahead and click here to confirm it. It does all the things that it needs to do. Units that were out of supply that need to be marked in supply, that happens. Units that are out of supply get incremented, so from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 2 or whatever. For units that are drawing supply from depots, it expends the supply points from the depot based on the units that are drawing supply there. And then it prints out this nice report. So the results for this supply phase: Axis player expended 35.5, Allied player expended 27. For Axis units, okay, this guy came back into supply. This one is now out of supply at U1. He's now out of supply at U1. And these two are still out of supply, and they've gone up to U2. On the French side, because I marked those guys, they really should not have been out of supply, but I marked them as out of supply, so now they're out of supply at U1. This is always available at the end of each supply determination phase. Below it, we have the standard report, which is always available from here on down. It's always available if we go over here and click on the supplies option here. And this shows us, with red obviously meaning problem area, that we have things, for example, Marseille is down to 0 points. I did that intentionally just for demonstration purposes. Marseille is down to 0 supply points, but it still has 4.5 REs assigned to it. So these 4.5 REs, the units that go along with those, which we'll see farther down in a moment, they need to either get themselves to assigned to a new depot, or we need to get some supplies into Marseille to take care of the units there. So if we scroll on down to the details, we can see that for this depot, we have this German core, which happens to be in the same hex as the depot. It doesn't have to be, but it happens to be in this case. And within that core, we can see there 3 of the 5 units are out of supply. One's out for 2 turns, and 2 of them are out for 1 turn, and so on, as we look down here. And we can see a complete logistics report for everything that's going on. And like I say, from this line downward, always available anytime players want to see it. This area in here is only shown at the end of each supply determination phase to explain exactly what happened under the hood while the system was deciding who should be in supply and who should be out of supply and what needs to be done about that. Again, as I mentioned, you can override that stuff, and then it comes to this, for example, because I overrode the system and said put these French units out of supply, and there they are. So that's an example of what I have been doing with my experimental, and I want to emphasize experimental supply module that uses depots and supply points instead of the usual rules as written supply system.